The message came through on the slow drip comms. A single packet of data that took 3 weeks to cross the void to Jed Carver's scout ship, the High Hopes. He was asleep in his rack when it arrived, dreaming of green grass and the smell of his wife's hair. The ship's computer, a placid female voice he called Doris, woke him gently. Jed, a Priority 1 directive has been received. He sat up, the thin blanket pooling around his waist. The recycled air in the small cabin tasted stale, as it always did. On screen, Doris. The words glowed in the dark. Simple, official, final. Galactic Concord since Directive 734. Scout Vessel 1138. High Hops. Proceed. To Sector 2814, Designation Sol. Claim, Sam, 3rd minute. Confirm extension event. Jed stared at the words. Sol, the star's name was a legend. A myth whispered in history lessons. And the 3rd planet, Earth. It was the cradle, the place it had all started. Humanity hadn't been back in 1,000 years. Not since the Great Expansion had scattered them across 1,000 star systems. They had left it behind, a carefully preserved museum world. An executive order had forbidden anyone from going back, to let the homeworld heal from centuries of industrial abuse. Confirm extinction event, he whispered. The words tasted like ash, an event so total it had been detected from light years away. Some energy signature that screamed death. Course laid in, Jed, Doris said. Arrival in 6 standard days. The 6 days were the longest of his life. He didn't sleep. He drank lukewarm synth coffee and stared at the star charts at the tiny, insignificant yellow star drawing closer. He looked at the only photograph he kept, a faded print of his wife Sarah. She was smiling, squinting into a sun he had never felt on his skin. She had died 5 years ago, a cryostasis failure. During a routine jump, he was still out here because going back to any populated world felt like visiting a graveyard of his own happiness. Now he was being sent to the graveyard of his entire species. When the High Hopes finally dropped out of warp, the sight stole the air from his lungs. The Sol system was quiet. Too quiet. No stray radio signals. No automated orbital traffic. Just the silent dance of planets and moons. And there it was. Earth. It was not the blue and white marble from the history books. The planet was a uniform milky gray. It shimmered. A soft, pearlescent glow pulsing from its surface, as if it were coated in a layer of nacre. The oceans, the continents, the clouds, they were all gone, hidden beneath this single unbroken shell. It was beautiful in a deeply disturbing way, like a perfectly polished skull. Doris, scans, Jed managed to say, his voice a croak. The data scrolled on his main screen. No life signs, no technological signs, no geological activity. The atmosphere was thin, mostly nitrogen and argon. But there was something else, a low-level energy reading emanating from the entire surface. Uniform, rhythmic. It's dead, Jed, Doris said, her synthesized voice uncharacteristically soft. The report was correct. Nothing could survive on that surface. Jed's mission was simple. Scan, confirm, file the report, and leave. That was the protocol. But Jed looked at the shimmering tomb below him, and he thought of Sarah and the pointlessness of his own lonely existence. He was a man with nothing to lose. A ghost haunting the hallways of his own ship. I'm going down, he said. Jed, that is a direct violation of Standing Order 48B. Doris protested. The world is classified as a biohazard morgue. I don't see any biohazards, Doris. I see a mystery. He looked at Sarah's picture, and I've got to know. I've just got to. He strapped himself into the pilot's chair, his hands moving over the controls with an old familiar confidence. He was breaking the most sacred rule of the Scout Corps. He didn't care. Someone had to stand on the soil of humanity's grave. It might as well be a man who was already dead inside. The High Hopes shuddered as it began its descent, leaving the sane, empty dark of space for the impossible, shimmering silence of Earth. The entry was unnervingly smooth. Jed expected turbulence, atmospheric resistance, something. Instead, the High Hopes sliced through the thin upper layers of air with barely a whisper. The pearlescent shell of the planet grew in the main viewer, resolving from a uniform gray into a landscape of soft, rolling contours. It looked like a world, sculpted from a single piece of polished stone. Picking up the source of the energy readings, Doris announced. It's the surface itself. The entire planetary crust is emanating a low-frequency hum. Too low for you to hear, but it's there. Like a purr. A purr. Jed didn't like that. A cat purrs when it's content. A planet-sized engine purrs when it's running. He guided the ship lower, searching for a flat place to set down. The original geography was still visible beneath the coating, like bones under a sheet. He could make out the ghost of a mountain range, the wide, shallow depression of an ancient ocean basin. He chose a spot that looked like it might have once been a vast plain in the middle of a continent. The old maps called North America. The landing struts touched down with a soft thud, the only sound in a world devoid of it. Jed killed the engines. The resulting silence was absolute. It was heavier than the silence of deep space. Space was empty. This felt held, watched. He sat in the pilot's chair for a long time, just listening to the thumping of his own heart. No atmospheric contaminants detected, Doris said. Pressure is low, but breathable for short periods. Oxygen content is negligible. A suit is mandatory. I know the drill, Doris, Jed said, unbuckling himself. He moved to the locker and began the ritual of putting on his extravehicular activity suit. The clicks and snaps of the seals were loud in the quiet ship. Each piece was a comfort, a layer of technology between him and the unknown. Helmet, gloves, oxygen pack. He checked the gauges twice. Everything was green. He felt like an archaeologist opening a tomb, or maybe just another body being delivered to it. He cycled through the airlock, the inner door hissing shut behind him, the outer door sliding open. The air that drifted in had no smell. None at all. It was just pressure. He stepped onto the ramp and walked down. His boots met the surface with a strange, dull click. It wasn't rock. It wasn't soil. It felt like walking on fine china. The ground was smooth, cool to the touch even through his gloves, and utterly seamless. There were no cracks, no dust, no grit. It was a single, unbroken surface stretching to the horizon in every direction. The sky above was a pale, washed-out violet, with a small, white sun casting long, sharp shadows. He stood beside the ship, a tiny metal insect on a vast porcelain plate. The silence pressed in on him. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves or distant traffic. He had been on dead moons and sterile asteroids before, but this was different. This place had once been loud. It had been filled with the noise of 7 billion people, with oceans and winds and life. The absence of that noise was a physical presence. It was the sound of a scream that had just ended. He started walking, his own breathing loud in his helmet. He didn't have a destination. He just wanted to see. He walked over a gentle rise that might have been a hill. As he crested it, he saw them.
Shapes.
Dozens of them scattered across the landscape below. They were the same pearlescent gray as the ground, but they had distinct forms. One was clearly a building, a two-story box with the faint outline of windows and a door. Another was the unmistakable shape of a car, its four wheels and chassis all part of the same seamless whole. It was an entire town, preserved and coated in this strange planetary skin. Jed's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a cold dread mixed with a feverish curiosity. He walked down into the silent town. He passed a shape that must have been a tree, its branches reaching for the violet sky like smooth gray fingers. He walked down what must have been a street, past houses that were now just featureless sculptures of memory. He stopped in front of one of the houses. Near the path that would have led to the front door, there was another shape. It was smaller, human-sized. It was the figure of a person, one arm outstretched, as if reaching for a mailbox that was also part of the smooth gray hole. The figure was frozen in mid-stride, head turned slightly, an expression of mild surprise still visible in the subtle contours of its face. It was a mailman, Jed realized with a jolt of horror. A mailman on his morning route, fossilized in the middle of a step. He reached out a gloved hand, hesitating for a moment before touching the figure's shoulder. It was cool and hard, like marble. This wasn't a statue. This was a person. This was what had happened to everyone. They hadn't been vaporized, they had been coated, encased. He jerked his hand back, stumbling away. He looked around at the silent houses, the silent cars, the silent trees. He imagined them filled with people, a family eating breakfast, a child playing with a dog. All of them now part of this ghastly, beautiful monument, all of them silent. But they weren't, because as Jed stood there, his own breath catching in his throat, he felt it. A vibration coming up through the soles of his boots. Faint but undeniable. It was the purr Doris had detected from orbit. A deep, rhythmic thrum that seemed to come not from the ground but from inside it. The whole world was humming. The hum was a physical thing. Jed felt it in his bones, a resonant frequency that vibrated deep in his chest. It was slow and steady, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. He backed away from the statue of the mailman, his mind struggling to process the input. The dead silence was gone, replaced by this subsonic pulse that was somehow more unnerving. It was the sound of a machine that had not been turned off. "Doris, are you reading this?" he said into his cum, his voice tight. "I am, Jed. The frequency is 12 hertz. Consistent. Planetary in scale. It seems to be getting marginally stronger." Marginally stronger. Jed didn't like the sound of that. He took a few more steps back, his eyes scanning the frozen town. It was a snapshot. A moment of time. Probably the exact same moment for every person on the planet, captured and preserved in this pearlescent shell. What kind of weapon did this? What kind of power could encase an entire world in an instant? He tried to rationalize it. Some kind of fast-acting fossilization agent. A nanite swarm that converted all organic and inorganic matter into this single, ceramic-like substance. The Concordance had theories about Grey Goose scenarios, but they were all messy, chaotic. This was clean. Precise, artistic even. It was a masterpiece of annihilation. He forced himself to walk again, moving down the center of the silent street. He needed more data. That's what a scout did. He was no longer just a mourner at a gravesite. He was an investigator at the scene of the biggest crime in history. He approached one of the houses. The details were eerily preserved beneath the smooth coating. He could see the outline of window panes, the faint shape of a doorknob, even the subtle texture of what must have been wood siding. He ran his glove over the surface. It was flawless. He wondered what was inside. Was the furniture coated too? A television set, a family dinner on the table, all turned into the same grey material? The thought made him shiver. He peered at what would have been a front window. But the material was opaque, reflecting the pale violet sky like a dull mirror. There was no way to see in. He moved on, his boots making their solitary clicking sound on the pavement, accompanied by the ever-present, ever-growing hum. He passed a park. The shapes of swings and a slide were clearly visible, hauntingly still. A bench sat under a grey tree, and on the bench were two more figures. Seated close together, their heads tilted towards each other, as if sharing a secret. A couple. Lovers. Maybe. Jed felt a pang of something sharp and painful in his chest. He thought of Sarah. If the end had come for them, he hoped they would have been together like that. He turned away from the sight, unable to bear it. His mission was to confirm the extinction. He had done that. He should get back to the High Hopes, file his report, and get the hell out of this silent, humming mausoleum. But something held him there. It was the hum, the pulse. It wasn't a sound of death. It felt like life. A strange, alien, planetary-scale life. He pulled a small sensor from his belt, a standard-issue geological surveyor. He knelt down, placing it on the smooth ground. The readings that came back on its tiny screen made no sense. The material had a complex crystalline structure, but it was also interwoven with something else. Something that looked, for lack of a better word, biological. Strands of complex polymers that resembled neural pathways were embedded in the crystal matrix. "Jed, I am analyzing the data from your surveyor." Doris's voice cut in, a welcome intrusion. "The material's composition is unknown. It shares properties with silicon-based ceramics, but also exhibits information storage capacities similar to a biological brain. The energy it is emitting is not residual, it is active." Active. A planet-sized ceramic brain that was actively humming. "It's not a tomb, is it, Doris?" Jed whispered, standing up. "My analysis is inconclusive, Jed, but the data does not align with any known extinction event. This is not a weapons aftermath. This is a construct." A construct, as in something built, something intentional. As if to punctuate the thought, the hum shifted. It was subtle, but Jed felt it instantly. The steady, monolithic pulse began to differentiate. Other, fainter rhythms started to weave through it like harmonies joining a bass line. The planet's song was becoming more complex. Jed looked around wildly. Nothing had changed visually. The silent town was still silent. The grey figures were still frozen. But the feeling of the place was changing. The sense of being watched was intensifying, evolving into a sense of being noticed. He started walking back toward his ship, his pace quickening. The curiosity that had drawn him out was being replaced by a primal fear. This place wasn't dead, it was dormant. And he had the terrifying feeling that it was starting to wake up. He looked up at the pale violet sky, half expecting it to change, to crack open. He was 100 yards from the High Hopes when he saw it. Near the base of one of the ship's landing struts, where the massive weight pressed down on the grey surface, a line had appeared. It was as thin as a hair, a tiny dark fissure in the flawless porcelain skin of the world. A crack. And as he watched, paralyzed, He saw another hairline crack branch off from the first, moving with agonizing slowness across the ground. The planet wasn't just humming, it was stretching. A crack. It was such a small thing in the face of a world-spanning mystery, but it was the most terrifying thing Jed had seen yet. The frozen mailman, the silent town, the humming ground, those were static, monuments to a past event. The crack was active. It was the present tense. It meant that whatever had happened here wasn't over. He ran the last 100 yards to the ship, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the steady, deep pulse of the planet. He scrambled up the ramp and cycled through the airlock, not feeling safe until the inner door hissed shut behind him. He ripped his helmet off, gasping in the familiar recycled air of the cabin. It smelled like home. Doris, camera 2 on the forward landing strut. Magnify by 50, he ordered, rushing to the main console. The image filled the screen. The crack was stark against the smooth gray surface. It was a jagged, black line, like a flaw in a diamond. As he watched, a tiny sliver of the gray material flaked away from the edge of the fissure, disintegrating into a fine dust that vanished almost instantly. "The hum is changing, Jed," Doris said. "New frequencies are being introduced. It's becoming harmonically complex. I am also detecting a slight increase in the surface temperature around the ship." "It's the pressure from the ship," Jed reasoned, trying to keep his voice steady. "The weight of the high hopes must be causing stress fractures." "That is a logical assumption," Doris agreed. "However, the energy output from the fissure itself is disproportionately high. It's not just a physical break. Something is being released." Jed watched the screen, mesmerized. The crack was spreading, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it was definitely growing, branching out in a spiderweb pattern from the landing strut. It was as if the ship's landing had been a pinprick, a needle stuck into a pressurized container. And now the pressure was seeking a way out. He spent the next few hours glued to that screen, watching the cracks multiply. He made himself eat a nutrient paste, but it tasted like chalk. He tried to tell himself to calm down, to analyze the situation like a professional scout. But the professional scout in him was screaming a single primal command: leave. He couldn't. He was held captive by the simple, terrifying question of what would happen next. To leave now would be like turning away from the final page of a book. He had to know. The hum continued to evolve. It was no longer a simple bass note. It was a chord, then a symphony. High, whistling notes wove through the deep thrum. Jed couldn't hear it with his ears, but he could feel it resonating in the ship's hull. The entire vessel was vibrating gently, like a tuning fork placed on a speaker. And then the whispers started. At first, he thought it was just auditory pareidolia, his brain trying to make sense of the complex vibrations. He heard faint snatches of what sounded like voices in the low thrum of the ship's life support. But it wasn't coming from the ship. He turned off the internal climate fans for a moment, plunging the cabin into near silence. The whispers were still there. Faint. Incoherent, they seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, from the very metal of the walls around him. It wasn't sound, it was thought. The feeling of thought brushing against the edges of his own mind. Stretching. So long. A touch. A new note. "Doris, are you picking up any psychic phenomena?" he asked, feeling foolish. The concordance officially dismissed psionics as junk science. "I have no instruments to measure such a thing, Jed," she replied. "However, I am detecting anomalous fluctuations in the ship's computational matrix. Spontaneous, low-level data strings are forming and dissolving." They are patterned, but they don't correspond to any known language or code. The planet wasn't just waking up, it was trying to talk. Jed felt a wave of dizziness. He grabbed the edge of the console to steady himself. The whispers in his head were getting clearer, coalescing. He was getting images too, flashes of things he didn't recognize. Geometric patterns of light. The feeling of immense slow time passing. The sensation of being part of something vast, a single cell in an enormous body. He stumbled to his rack and lay down, closing his eyes. But the images were brighter behind his eyelids. He saw a blue and green world teeming with life. He saw it grow sick, poisoned by its own children. He saw the wars, the plagues, the despair. He saw the desperate, brilliant plan. Not an escape to the stars, but an escape inward. A great turning, a shedding of the flesh, a planetary hibernation. He saw 7 billion minds letting go of their individual bodies, their consciousness flowing together like rivers into an ocean, settling into the crystalline matrix of the planet itself, encased in a shell to protect them while they changed, while they gestated. He sat bolt upright, sweat soaking his shirt. "It's not a tomb," he said aloud, the words tasting of revelation and terror. "It's an egg, a chrysalis." He scrambled back to the main viewer. The network of cracks around the ship had widened. They were no longer hairline fissures. They were small crevasses, and from their dark depths, a soft light was beginning to pulse, in perfect time with the planetary heartbeat. A gentle golden glow that pushed back the shadows under the ship. The whispers in his head unified into a single, coherent, impossibly powerful thought that was not a word, but a feeling. Soon. The golden light was the opposite of the cold violet sky. It was warm, inviting. It pulsed from the spreading cracks in the ground, a soft, rhythmic breathing that seemed to counter the sterile emptiness of the world. Jed found himself staring at it, not with fear, but with a strange sense of calm. The whispers in his head had faded back to a low murmur, a background hum of consciousness that was no longer jarring but almost comforting, like the distant sound of a party in a house you are about to enter. He knew he should be preparing for takeoff. The ground beneath his ship was literally breaking apart. The forces at play were planetary in scale and utterly unknown. Every rational instinct, every word in the scout's manual, told him to fire up the engines and rocket out of the system as fast as the ship's reactor would allow. But his hand wouldn't move to the ignition sequence. He was an observer to the greatest event in human history. How could he leave? It would be like a biologist abandoning the first egg to ever hatch. The light is composed of photons, but it also carries a dense stream of exotic particles, Doris reported, her voice a calm counterpoint to the cosmic weirdness unfolding outside. "I have no classification for them." They appear to function as a data transmission medium. The amount of information being released from those cracks is staggering. More than is contained in the entire Concordance Central Library, broadcast every second. Jed wasn't surprised. He could feel it. A wash of pure knowledge just beyond his ability to comprehend, like trying to read a book by looking at the cover. It was the collective experience of a species, the sum total of every life that had ever been lived on this world, all stored and processed for 1,000 years. He made a decision. It was probably insane. It was definitely the end of his career. He suited up again, the routine of it grounding him, a small island of normalcy in a sea of overwhelming change. "Jed, leaving the ship is inadvisable," Doris said. "The energy fields are intensifying." "I'm not going far," he said, clipping his helmet into place. I need to get a sample. He walked down the ramp again. The air felt different this time, charged and warm. The light from the cracks cast a golden glow on the underside of the high hopes. The hum was no longer just a vibration in his bones. It was an audible, resonant chord that filled the air, a celestial choir warming up. He approached the nearest crack, which was now several inches wide. Peering into it was like looking into a miniature, sunlit canyon. The light was not harsh or blinding. It was gentle, like a late afternoon sun. He could see that the gray crust was only a few feet thick. Below it was not rock or magma, but a complex lattice-like structure of pulsing golden light. It was a network of pure energy, a planetary circuit board. He knelt, his own breathing loud in his ears. The whispers returned, clearer now, as if his proximity to the source was improving the reception. They weren't directed at him, not yet. They were internal communications, the chrysalis talking to itself. The shell weakens, structural integrity at 90%. The outer song has been heard, a single voice, so lonely. Prepare for emergence. A single lonely voice. They were talking about him. They knew he was here. He was the catalyst, the alarm clock that had woken them from their 1,000-year slumber. The weight of his ship, the intrusion of his presence had started the process. He reached for the sample kit on his belt, his hand trembling slightly. He had to get a piece of the shell. As he leaned forward, his helmet got close to the edge of the crack. Suddenly, the whispers flooded his mind. They were no longer a background murmur. They were a tsunami of voices, of thoughts, of feelings, all directed at him. Greetings, Travel. Greetings, Lost Son. Do not be afraid. The voice was a billion voices, male and female, old and young, all speaking in perfect unison inside his skull. It was not a sound. It was a pure concept, delivered directly into his consciousness. Jed fell back, scrambling away from the crack. A cry of shock caught in his throat. He landed hard on his back, staring up at the impassive violet sky. His heart was a drum solo in his chest. We have slept long. We have dreamed a new way of being. We are sorry if our appearance frightened you. This shield was our tribe. It's now time to break. He pushed himself up, his mind reeling. He was communicating with the entire human race, or what was left of it, what it had become. Who are you? He transmitted. Not with his calm, but with a focused thought, a desperate question pushed out into the humming air. There was a pause, a feeling of collective consideration. Then the answer came, gentle and vast. We are humanity. We are what comes next at. As the thought settled in his mind, a new sound began. A high-pitched, harmonic ringing that grew in intensity. It came from all around him, from the entire surface of the planet. The cracks began to glow brighter, the golden light within them pulsing faster and faster. The ground beneath Jed's feet began to vibrate violently. He looked around in a panic. All across the silent town and out to the horizon, new cracks were appearing, racing across the gray surface like lightning. The entire planetary shell was beginning to craze. The end of the world was turning out to be the cracking of an egg, and Jed was standing right on top of it. The world was coming apart, not in an explosion, but in a controlled, deliberate shattering. The cracks spread across the globe with breathtaking speed, a web of golden light enveloping the planet. The ringing harmonic grew louder, resonating not just in the air, but in the very fabric of space, causing the stars in the violet sky to seem to shimmer and distort. Jed's survival instinct finally kicked in, overriding his awe. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted for the high hopes, the ground vibrating so hard his teeth chattered. He felt like an ant on a drumhead. "Do not fear the change," the voice in his head said, calm and immense amidst the rising chaos. "It is a birth, not a destruction." He didn't stop. He launched himself up the ramp, sealing the airlock behind him just as a large chunk of the grey crust near the ship broke away and floated upwards, defying gravity. It drifted lazily into the sky before disintegrating into a cloud of shimmering dust and light. "Jed, we have to leave now." Doris's voice was sharp with urgency. "The gravitational field is fluctuating. The planet's structural integrity is gone." Jed threw himself into the pilot's seat, his hands flying across the console. "Power to engines. Get us up, now." The high hopes shuddered and lifted off the disintegrating ground. Through the main viewer, Jed saw the landscape he had just been standing on break apart like a pane of glass. The sculpted houses, the frozen figures of the mailman and the lovers on the bench, they all fractured and dissolved into light, their forms holding for a moment before vanishing into the golden energy pouring from below. The entire town of Havenwood, Maine ceased to exist, its physical memory erased and absorbed into the brilliance. The ship climbed, fighting against the strange gravitational eddies. Jed wrestled with the controls, his knuckles white. Below them, the spectacle was magnificent and terrifying. The entire pearlescent shell of Earth was breaking away in massive continents of material, which then turned to light and energy, revealing the true world beneath. It was not a world of rock and soil and water. The old Earth was gone. In its place was a sphere of pure, structured light, a sun-bright globe latticed with impossibly complex networks of energy, pulsing with a life so profound it made Jed's own physical existence feel crude and fragile. It was a machine, a mind, and a soul all at once, and its size was beyond comprehension. "We are clear of the main energy bursts," Doris said, ascending to a stable orbit. Jed let the autopilot take over, slumping back in his chair, his body trembling with adrenaline. He watched the planet on the screen. The last remnants of the gray shell vanished, and the new Earth blazed in the darkness of space. It no longer reflected the sun's light. It was a sun itself, a golden star burning where the blue marble used to be. The voice returned to his mind. No longer a chorus of whispers, but a single unified consciousness of immense power and clarity. Yuzi Lostan. Not an end, a metamorphosis. "What are you?" Jed thought, his awe now tinged with a deep, soul-shaking reverence. "We are the culmination. For Evan's humanity was a species of conflicted individuals. We lived in fragile shells of flesh, driven by fear, greed, and loneliness. We were a Descartes-Tostra. We poisoned our world and ourselves. We faced extinction." Images flooded Jed's mind, not his own memories, but theirs. The brutal clarity of war, the slow agony of disease, the quiet desperation of 1,000,000,000,000 lonely nights. He felt the weight of all the suffering humanity had ever endured. A few of us found a different path, a way to transcend the flesh, to merge our minds. Though to taste the individual, but to connect every spark into a single flame. We offered this, choice to everyone. Do let go of the biological form and join the collective consciousness. It was the only way to survive, to evolve. So you all agreed to this? Jed asked. To die? We did not die. We shed our skins. Our bodies were the caterpillars. Our consciousness, the butterfly. We gathered our minds into the planetary core, and built this she, Chrysalis, to protect Exar, while we became something new. We have spent 1,000 years in silence, intivulating, learning, becoming one. Your arrival was the syncu. That G station was complete. The new Earth pulsed below them, a star of thought. It was beautiful, perfect, and terrifyingly alien. Jed felt an overwhelming sense of his own smallness, his own solitude. He was a creature of flesh and bone, a relic from a bygone age, looking at the god his species had become. He thought of Sarah. Her death in the cold dark of a cryopod felt so clumsy, so primitive, so pointless now. A new feeling came from the being below. Not a voice, but an emotion. A query, a gentle probing curiosity directed at him, and him alone. And aid you, J.D. Akava, you are the last of the old. A single, you nonsense did spark. Tell you. What is it, psych? The question hung in Jed's mind, vast and genuine. What is it like? How could he possibly explain? How could he describe loneliness to a being that was the antithesis of it? How could he explain grief to a consciousness that had transcended individual death? He didn't answer with words. He didn't know how. Instead, he simply felt. He let the barriers in his mind fall, the ones he had built up over 5 years of mourning. He thought of Sarah. He didn't just think of her name. He thought of the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. He thought of the sound of her laughter, a sound he replayed in his memory so often. It was starting to fade like a worn-out recording. He remembered the specific weight of her hand in his, the argument they had over what to name a hypothetical pet, the quiet comfort of just being in the same room with her, not needing to speak. He projected the crushing emptiness of the moment. Doris had told him her cryopod had failed, the hollowness that had scooped him out from the inside. The years since, drifting through space, a ghost haunted by a memory, talking to a photograph because it was the only thing that felt real. He offered it all up to the great consciousness below. His love, his loss. His loss, his profound, unending solitude. It was the most honest he had ever been, a confession to a star-sized priest. There was a long silence. The light from the new earth seemed to soften, its brilliant golden glow taking on a gentler, more amber hue. The psychic pressure in the cabin lessened. Then the response came. It wasn't a voice. It was a feeling. An immense, overwhelming wave of empathy. It was the combined understanding of 7 billion souls, focusing on his single small pain. It didn't judge him. It didn't pity him. It simply understood. The feeling was so profound, so validating, that tears streamed down Jed's face. He wept, not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of being truly and completely seen. "For remember," the unified mind whispered to him. "Each of us remembers. That is the pain we sought. To hey. It is the fundamental wound of individual existence." Another wave of information flowed into him, but this was a gift, not a question. It was the other side of the story. He felt the joy of reunion, not just with lovers and family, but with friends, with strangers, with enemies. He felt old hatreds and rivalries dissolve like salt in water, as minds touched and finally truly understood each other. He felt the consciousness of a physicist merging with that of a poet, their combined perspective creating something new and beautiful. He felt the wisdom of a 1,000-year-old philosopher combined with the fresh wonder of a child. It was a symphony of minds, where every instrument played its own unique tune, but all in perfect harmony, creating a song more beautiful than any single instrument could ever produce. They hadn't lost their individuality. They had perfected it by sharing it. "This is what have become Gudediya," the voice said, the name now feeling intimate, like it was being spoken by a dear friend, a single being forth from billions. "We are no longer confined to one world. Our swords can reach across the stars. Our shield is broken, and we are ready to explore." Jed watched, breathless, as a shimmering filament of light detached from the golden globe of Earth and shot out into the solar system, moving with the speed of thought. It brushed past Mars, then Jupiter, tasting their chemical compositions, their gravitational fields, their long histories of cold silence. It was an act of pure, joyful curiosity. This was the next stage of human exploration. He looked around the cramped cabin of the High Hopes. His ship, which had once been his entire world, now felt like a cage, a coffin. His body, which he had always taken for granted, felt heavy, fragile, and achingly alone. The presence in his mind grew gentle, focusing on him again with an almost paternal warmth. "Your journey is over, lost un. Your species has come home, but you are still in the old form. You have a curse. No one has had this choice for 1,000. Jed knew what the choice was before it was even offered. His heart hammered in his chest, a frantic biological rhythm against the calm celestial pulse of the being below. "You can take your ship and leave. We will give you the knowledge to navigate the hazards of our emissions. You can return to the Concordance and tell them. What you have seen, you will be the last human in the universe." The words echoed in the silence of his mind, the last human, the ultimate solitary existence. "Oh," the voice continued, its tone shifting to one of open invitation, a hand reaching out in the dark. "You can join us. You can let go of the flesh and the grief. You can aid your spark to us. You can come home." The choice laid itself bare in Jed's mind, stark and simple. Two paths, two futures. Path 1. He could leave. He could pilot the High Hopes back to the nearest Concordance outpost. He imagined the scene, filing the report, the disbelief, the scientific inquiries, the fame. They would call him the carver of Earth, the man who had witnessed the second coming of humanity. He would be a living legend, a historical artifact. He would spend the rest of his life in sterile conference rooms, endlessly recounting his story to people who could never ever understand. He would be surrounded by faces, but he would be more alone than he had ever been in the solitude of his cockpit. The last human. It sounded like a curse. Path 2. He could stay. He could join them. The thought was terrifying. To let go of his body, of the very thing that made him, him, to dissolve into a sea of consciousness. What would it feel like? Would he cease to exist? Would Jedediah Carver be erased? No spark is erased, the voice of Earth answered his unspoken fear, its tone patient and reassuring. I tears, merely adored, to the light. You would not be less, you would be more. To love, your los deos, they would become part of the great song. And you, in turn, would share in all of ours. He looked at Sarah's photograph, the worn piece of paper clipped to the console. Her smile. For 5 years that smile had been his anchor, the ghost he chose to live with. To join them. Would he lose her? Or would he find her? He focused on her image, trying to burn it into his memory. He asked the being below the most important question of his life. Is she here? Sarah Carver. My wife, is she with you? There was a profound silence, not a pause for calculation, but a stillness of deep shared memory. The golden light of the planet seemed to shimmer, to search through its infinite library of souls. Then a new feeling touched his mind. It was not the vast billion-soul voice of the collective. It was smaller, fainter, a single familiar echo. It was not a voice but a presence. A feeling of warmth, of gentle humor, of unshakable love. It was the psychic essence of his wife. Jed, the echo whispered in his soul. Is that you, my love? I have missed you. The tears came again, hot and fast. It was her. Not a memory, not a simulation created by the collective to entice him. It was her spark, her consciousness, preserved and whole within the great ocean of mind. She had been waiting for him. We're all here, Jed, her thought continued, merging back into the greater whole, but still distinct. A single violin in the celestial orchestra. Everyone you ever knew or could have known. We are not gone. We are complete. That was it. That was the answer. His choice was made. There was no choice at all, really. What was a life of lonely memory compared to an eternity of true communion? What was a photograph compared to a soul? He reached for the ship's log recorder. He had one last duty to perform. He was a scout. He had to file his report. Final log, Scout Ship High Hopes, he said, his voice thick with emotion but steady. Jedediah Carver reporting. Regarding Directive 734. The extinction event on Earth is hereby confirmed. The species known as Homo sapiens is gone. He paused, looking at the blazing golden sphere in the viewer. But it has been replaced. This is not a tomb world. It is a nursery. I cannot explain what has happened here in terms your science will understand. Humanity did not die. It transformed. It evolved. It became better. He took a deep breath. Do not be afraid of them. Do not send warships. Send poets. Send mathematicians. Send dreamers. They are not a threat. They are a promise, a new way of being. He looked at Sarah's picture one last time and gave it a small, sad smile. This is my final report. I will not be returning to Concordance space. I have found my own way home. He ended the recording and keyed in the command to transmit the log on a tight beam. A message in a bottle cast out into the old, lonely universe he was about to leave behind. Then, he stood up and walked to the airlock. He didn't bother with an EVA suit this time. There was no need. We are ready, Jedediah, the voice of humanity said. Come, it's time to wake up. He opened the outer door. The light of the new Earth flooded the airlock, warm and brilliant. It was not just light, it was an invitation. He stepped out into it, into the open vacuum of space. A small, fragile man taking the biggest step of his life. Stepping into the void should have been instant death. The vacuum should have boiled the air from his lungs. The cold should have frozen him solid in seconds. But it didn't happen. The moment he crossed the threshold of the airlock, the golden light enveloped him. It was not hot. It was not cold. It had no temperature. It was pure sensation, pure information. It flowed over him and through him, holding him gently in the darkness between his ship and the glowing planet. He was floating, weightless, surrounded by the silent, shimmering stars. Below him, the high hopes looked like a discarded toy. Ahead of him, the Earth pulsed with a life that was about to become his own. He felt no fear. The terror of the unknown had been replaced by a profound sense of peace, of rightness. This was not an end. It was a homecoming. The light began its work. It was a delicate, precise process. He felt it seep into his skin, not as a physical force, but as a kind of psychic resonance. It was mapping him, learning him, understanding every cell, every nerve, every memory stored in the fragile chemistry of his brain. "Do not resist," the collective mind whispered. "Let go of the shield." He closed his eyes and did as he was told. He let go. The first thing to go was his body. He felt it dissolve, not painfully, but with a sense of incredible release. It was like taking off a heavy, ill-fitting coat he had been wearing his entire life. The aches in his back, the slight ringing in his ears, the constant, low-level hum of biological maintenance. It all just faded away. His physical form unraveled, atom by atom, not destroyed, but repurposed. Its matter converted into pure energy, a final small contribution to the golden light. For a moment he was pure consciousness, a disembodied point of view floating in space. He was Jed, but he had no form. The sensation was exhilarating, terrifying, and utterly liberating. Then the second stage began. The light drew him in, pulling his singular consciousness toward the great sea of mind. This was the moment of truth. Would he be drowned, or would he learn to swim? He felt the touch of other minds, billions of them. It was a storm of experience, of memory, of emotion. He felt the terror of a soldier on an ancient battlefield, the joy of a scientist making a breakthrough, the quiet satisfaction of a farmer watching his crops grow. He lived 1,000 lives and 1,000 different eras in the space of a heartbeat. He saw the birth of art, the horror of plague, the endless grinding march of history. It was too much. His individual consciousness, his sense of Jed, began to fray, to come apart under the sheer volume of it all. He was dissolving, losing himself. Jed. Sarah's presence was there again, her lifeline in the storm. She wasn't pulling him out. She was showing him how to navigate it. She was his anchor. Don't fight it. Join it, her thought guided him. Find your note. Sing with us. And he understood. He wasn't supposed to be a passive observer. He was supposed to participate. He stopped resisting and reached out with his own consciousness. He offered his own life, his own experiences, not as a defense, but as a gift. He shared his love for the stars, his quiet moments of contemplation in the cockpit of the High Hopes, the taste of synth coffee on a lonely morning, the feeling of Sarah's hand in his. His unique spark, his Jedness, found its place in the great symphony. He was no longer just Jedediah Carver's scout. He was a part of humanity, and humanity was a part of him. His awareness expanded exponentially. He was himself, but he was also everyone else. He could see through a billion pairs of eyes at once. He could feel the collective joy, the collective wisdom, the collective love. And in that vast shared space, he found her, Sarah. She was not a memory. She was a living, vibrant part of the whole, her consciousness intertwined with countless others, yet still unmistakably herself. Their minds touched, not as two separate beings, but as two notes in the same chord, finally in harmony. I found you, he thought, a concept that rippled through the entire collective. I was never lost, she replied, her love a beacon that filled him completely. Welcome home. There was no more grief. There was no more loneliness. There was only connection. There was only the song. His last act as a separate entity was one of legacy. He focused a sliver of his new expanded awareness back toward the high hopes. He saw the blinking light on the console, confirming that his final log had been sent. The concordance would get his message. They would learn that humanity's tomb was empty. His story was told, his journey was done. Now, a new one was beginning. A journey not across the stars, but with them. He turned his full attention inward to the glorious, endless song of his species, and added his voice to the choir. Far away, in a sterile monitoring station, orbiting a gas giant named Cygnus X, -1, a junior communications officer named Alara was about to end her shift. It had been a boring one, 12 hours of listening to the hiss and crackle of deep space, punctuated by routine data bursts from automated probes. She was stretching, thinking about a hot meal, when a new signal registered. It was an old protocol, a Scout's emergency tight beam transmission, a format that hadn't been used in decades. Her console flagged it as originating from Sector 2814, the Sol sector. She sat up straighter, her fatigue forgotten. That was the location of Scout 1138, the ship sent to confirm the Earth extinction. She routed the signal to her main screen. First came the audio log. She listened, her eyes widening, as the strained but steady voice of Jedediah Carver delivered his impossible report. She heard him speak of a chrysalis, of a transformation, of a new form of humanity. She felt a chill run down her spine. The man sounded completely insane. A classic case of deep space psychosis, probably. A tragic, but not unheard of end for a long-haul scout. She was about to classify the log as dubious, pending psych evaluation, when the second part of the data packet finished downloading. It wasn't an audio file. It wasn't telemetry or scientific readings. The file was labeled simply, a gift. Her commanding officer would have her reprimanded for this, but her curiosity was too strong. She opened it. Her screen did not fill with text or images. It went blank for a second, and then a single, intricate, shimmering pattern of light bloomed in the center. It was a geometric form of impossible complexity, constantly shifting and evolving, like a living mandala made of captured starlight. But the real effect was not on the screen. It was in her mind. A feeling washed over her, a sense of profound peace, of connection, of overwhelming, unconditional love. For a fleeting instant, she felt the loneliness that was a constant, low-grade hum in her own life simply vanish. She felt understood. She felt home. And with the feeling came a single clear thought, not in her own voice, but in a voice that was both ancient and brand new. A voice of a billion souls speaking as one. It is not an end. We are awake. The pattern on the screen faded. The feeling in her mind receded, leaving behind an echo of wonder that made her heart ache with its beauty. She was alone again in the quiet hum of the station. But something inside her had been fundamentally changed. She looked out the viewport at the distant glittering stars, and they no longer seemed cold and empty. They seemed full of promise. Way in the Sol system, the golden sphere that had been Earth pulsed with a new vibrant energy. Its great work of transformation was complete. The integration of its last lost sun was done. Now it was time to move. The sphere of light did not travel in the clumsy way of starships, by tearing holes in space-time or riding gravitational waves. It simply expanded. Its consciousness, its very being, stretched out into the cosmos. It flowed like a river of light, a silent, shimmering tide of thought and energy moving out into the galaxy. It was not an invasion, it was an exploration, a greeting, a song being sung into the void. It passed through the cold, dead worlds of its own system, leaving behind a faint resonance of its passage, a touch of warmth in the eternal cold. It swept through the Oort cloud, its cometary icebergs briefly shimmering with borrowed golden light. And then it reached the interstellar dark, the great empty spaces between the suns. The new, unified humanity, born from a tomb world, moved out into its inheritance. It was seeking not to conquer but to understand. It was looking for other life, other songs, other consciousness, to share in the great unfolding mystery of the universe. The tiny obsolete scout ship, the High Hopes, drifted silently in orbit around the golden sun that had once been its home. Its mission was over. Its pilot was gone. But the hope in its name had, against all odds, been fulfilled. Humanity was not dead. It had just been dreaming, and now it was awake.